Sunday, we consider the story of the wise and the foolish bridesmaids. And as Jesus is teaching with this parable, we find a particularly somber, maybe dark wedding where the groom is delayed or missing, where we never hear of the bride, where the bridesmaids are sloppy at best, and some of them, being called foolish, end up missing the arrival of the groom, and neither do the bridesmaids share with each other or offer each other any consideration. The groom also is not very good at mercy, and the ending is less than a celebration. So when we talk about parables, I almost always recommend that we start with the pieces that don't make sense, that everybody would be like, what? Why? Because that's oftentimes where the teaching is most poignant. But in today's story, nothing makes sense, right? It doesn't make sense for the groom to not show up at his own wedding. It doesn't make sense for the bridesmaids to fall asleep while they wait. It doesn't make sense for the 5 bridesmaids that have extra oil to not share. It certainly doesn't make sense that the other 5 somehow managed to find a vendor open at midnight in order to buy more oil and come back. And it doesn't make sense that when they arrive with this precious oil, the groom rejects them. So all of this makes almost no sense, especially if we're reading from the perspective of the oil, as if what these bridesmaids had been entrusted with was the job of keeping oil for their lamps. Now, it is true that their responsibility was to light the way for the groom, to escort the groom in with their lighted lamps. But sometimes in religion, certainly this was true of the Pharisaical approach to Judaism, that Jesus was encountering this reform movement among Judaism. Sometimes things that aren't as important get elevated to the very important places, and sometimes the things that matter most are almost forgotten about. So if their job was to have oil in their lamp, then we can understand the trajectory of the parable, even though if Jesus said that we were supposed to stay alert and keep watch, well, all 10 failed at that. They all fell asleep. But so do you and I, so we shouldn't be too harsh in our judgment. But if it wasn't just about the oil, because otherwise the groom should have been pretty impressed. These bridesmaids somehow managed to go off and find oil at midnight and came back ready to do their job, if a little bit late. And it's probably not about punctuality, because the groom also was quite delayed. What if this is all about the encounter with the groom? Maybe the bridesmaid's primary responsibility wasn't to have a lamp lit, but to be there to encounter, to greet the groom. And they got so distracted in the details of their responsibilities, of the traditions, for us, maybe as we learn from the parable, of our religious duties and expectations, that they missed the encounter with the groom. Oh, if we could do it perfectly, right? Then the bridesmaids wouldn't fall asleep. Then they would be prepared when the groom arrived. Then they would all have extra oil. But those were all failures along the way. Everybody suffered from. But what got 5 of the bridesmaids rejected wasn't their sleepiness. And it wasn't even their lack of oil. It was that they weren't there when the groom arrived. They thought it was more important to go and find a merchant, somebody from whom to beg, borrow, or steal oil, than it was to be there to meet the groom. And I'm not sure what exactly that looks like in our lives. That will be a good reflection still between now and maybe Sunday morning, and certainly for me to continue to build in my life. But what are those encounters, and how might I miss them while I'm trying to dot all the I's and cross all the T's of religious practice? How in my life as your pastor, how in our lives together as followers of Jesus, as husbands and wives and children and friends, how easy it might be to get some of the details right, to go out and get the oil that we needed, but in the process, to miss the encounter that's right there with the groom, the one that maybe we could have in a happenstance at HUB or on a Sunday morning, or when your wife gets home from work, or when your children are grouchy and upset, maybe just because they're hungry or sleepy, like the bridesmaids. To recognize, to prioritize the encounter as the place where we find salvation, where religion meets Christianity, where God meets his people.